The oldest and strongest human emotion is fear, and the oldest and strongest type of fear is trepidation of the unknown. When we were children, our parents told us that monsters didn't exist, but we were sure that something was lurking under the bed or in the closet. Fear sees even if our eyes are closed. Welcome to the realm of the arcane. My name is Lon Strickler. Join me as I examine unexplained creatures, strange manifestations, and remarkable realities. Imagine this next hour as a voyage of discovery to strange lands, seeking not for new territory, but for new knowledge of the supernatural. Come on board as we begin this adventure together. Hey folks, good evening and welcome to another episode of Arcane Radio. I am your host, Lon Strickler, and I thank you for joining me here on the Paranormal King Radio Network. Now, since we're talking Bigfoot this evening, I'd like to present an account that I received not too long ago. The witness states my brothers and I were hunting near Kenosha, Utah. Our younger horse and dog were with us. We were just hunting small game, basically wasting time hunting squirrels and getting the colt used to hunting so we can use him in the future when we needed a pack horse. We had been walking off the trail for at least 2 miles, maybe 3. It was quite light outside, but getting close to sunset. We were hiking uphill and our dog suddenly began acting very squirrely. His hair stood up along his back, shoulders, and neck. He began huffing and snorting and getting very anxious. He was growling and woofing, but repeatedly looked at several different directions. At the same time, the colt began acting very spooky. His eyes widened, head thrown up high, nostrils flared, and began to dance around nervously. He was letting out snorts and breathing loud and heavily. Shortly after the animals began acting up, we came up over the part of the hill where it flattened out for a couple hundred yards before it curved up steeply again. As we came over the hill, there were trees 30 to 40 yards ahead, and I did a double take. There was a huge black hairy creature with bright yellow eyes standing slightly behind a tree, but peering out at us as if it was making a very poor and careless effort to conceal itself. It was just massive. Its thighs were the size of tree trunks, and its chest was easily 4 foot wide, if not larger. One arm was hanging loose to the side, and one was holding on to the tree next to it. The creature was swaying back and forth. It stared at us for only a few seconds, and we stared back, and then we heard a very low, chest-shaking rumble like the sound of an elephant makes. As it made that sound, it turned and sprinted up the hill ahead of us, and into the line of trees that covered the rest of the mountain ahead, as far as we could see. Now, as soon as it began running, our barking dog bolted and disappeared in the trees after it, as we yelled for the stupid mutt to come back. We could hear the dog barking further and further away, then silence for a few seconds. Suddenly, we heard a faint yelp off in the distance, and the yelping continued, and slowly got louder and louder until we saw the dog emerge from the tree line and come barreling back to us. The dog had many small cuts, and it was very dirty and scared, but it was otherwise in one piece. We busted our asses back down the mountain. After walking for what seemed like forever, we found an old empty cabin that was actually in quite good shape. We went inside and unlocked the garage door and let the spooky colt through it. Then locked the door and covered the little window at the top of the door with some newspaper masking tape. We went inside the little cabin and made sure every window and door were locked. All night long, we could hear something circling that cabin. Branches and sticks snapping, loud rustling, hisses, etc. We didn't leave that cabin until daylight. We practically ran our asses back to the truck. So, let's get started with tonight's show. Tonight's guests are Bigfoot enthusiast Dan Maslak and Regan Lee. Now, Dan has personally seeking the truth about Bigfoot for 20 years in his part of Georgia. He'll be telling us about the evidence he has collected during his deep in the woods investigations. Regan has been a long-time Bigfoot enthusiast who hails from Oregon. She will present her experiences and theories collected during her investigations in the Pacific Northwest. But I'll let them tell you a little bit more about themselves. So Dan and Regan, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Lon. It's great to be here.
Now, Dan, how did you become interested in Bigfoot?
Well, I'm about to turn 50 years old, so that means I was a child of the 70s, and that means that most guys around my age became fascinated when they first glanced at a movie called The Legend of Boggy Creek. I remember that seriously captivated me and frightened me all at the same time. Also, shortly thereafter that, I remember watching Leonard Nimoy's In Search of episode that focused on Bigfoot. And the other thing, I went to grade school in upstate New York, and I hate to admit this, but I was a child who didn't like to read. However, when my class was asked to go to the library and pick out books to read, I happened to stumble across a shelf of books that were, I guess you could say, were all about the paranormal: Bigfoot, the Bermuda Triangle, ghosts, flying saucers, and it was the ones related to Sasquatch that captivated me the most. And I must have read, for a kid who didn't like to read, I probably read those Bigfoot books about 20 times. So, and that's where I learned kind of like the basics of about the Patterson-Gimlin film, what this creature, the common characteristics of what this creature may look like based on eyewitness accounts, stuff like that. Fast forward, to my early 30s. That's where, and that at the same time, that's where the internet started coming about into play. That's where I really started getting a lot more serious about my research, catching up on books, documentaries. And then I really got into it about 10 years ago when I started doing my own investigations here in Georgia. And nothing really to speak about for a number of years until just the last couple of years. And I've had some pretty incredible stuff happen. I haven't seen a creature yet. I'm not quite sure I want to see one because I know they exist. But I've had some really fascinating, what I like to call occurrences happen in the last couple of years.
Interesting. Now, Regan, I'll ask you the same question. Why does the study of Bigfoot interest you?
Well, I've always been interested in just the strange and unusual, and mainly UFOs, just given my experiences with that, going back to my childhood. And then when I moved to Oregon about probably 40 years ago now, of course, just hearing about Bigfoot and doing, at the time I was going to the university and studying folklore and UFOs, and I started coming across a lot of Bigfoot stories in connection with UFOs and other just strange experiences like that, other than the flesh and blood stuff. And at first I thought it was really too strange to bother with, but I was also fascinated. And the more I got into it, the more, of course, I just had to find out everything I could. And then I started meeting people, living here in Oregon. I just know so many people that have had encounters with Sasquatch. And, people all walk, teachers, doctors, just all kinds of people. And like Dan, I myself have not seen a Sasquatch, but I've had a couple of strange experiences connected to Bigfoot. And so that interest of mine with Bigfoot just goes along with my interest in everything strange.
Yeah.
If it's strange, I'm interested.
Now, I have had an encounter, and I will tell you, they are out there. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, but I ain't convinced that something's out there. I'm not saying whether it's an indigenous, flesh and blood, interdimensional, or whatever it is. I think it kind of changes in the location. I think out in the Pacific Northwest, there may be indigenous pods of Bigfoot. I think in the East Coast, maybe in the Northeast. I think it's more of the other, something that comes in and out somehow is not actually indigenous. But we'll get into that a little further. Now, Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about your research, what you discovered, some of the evidence you've collected over the years.
All right. I've had 3 occurrences, 2 in 2017 within just 30 days of one another. Mm-hmm. And then I had a real interesting one just this last year in 2018, back in September. I don't want to take up all the time, so I'll do a kind of a quicker version of them so that Regan can also share experiences. Oddly enough, the first experience, I wasn't investigating. Now, I was in North Georgia, and anyone who's done research, especially in this state, knows that there is a hotbed of activity in the North Georgia mountains. Just to add a side note, in my own investigation, there's basically 5, what I would consider 5 very active areas in the state of Georgia. And 3 of them are actually in middle and south Georgia, but we can save that for another time. Mm-hmm. But one of the fourth active areas is in North Georgia, all along the Appalachian Trail at certain points. And now, I love to go backpacking, not just camping, but backpacking, where I'll hit the trail for 2, 3, 4 days at a time, and camp off the trail overnight and continue on the next day. In this particular instance, my first experience, I was just doing basic camping at a campground, and this campground is, one side of it lies off a fairly busy highway, and then the other side is a pretty heavily forested area. And the campground itself is only maybe, I don't know, probably 10 or 15 minutes from one of the trailheads for the Appalachian Trail. So it's up there. It was about somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning, and I was awakened by a group of coyotes doing a howl. And about 10 seconds after they had started, here comes what I can only describe as a super massive, loud, low guttural Yahoo type noise that was made. It completely drowned out the coyotes, and this Yahoo, low guttural Yahoo sound was so powerful that I could feel it coming through the ground, up and through my sleeping bag, right into my tent. And I have talked to people who have said that they heard the same type of sound. It's a low, massive, loud Yahoo sound, which usually happens minutes before a sighting occurs. Now, I didn't see the creature, but based on what other people have said, and then what I was hearing that night, tells me that there was a creature close by. And I started putting 2 and 2 together, and I was thinking those coyotes started howling. They may have come across some roadkill or a kill that they had made, and this creature decided to swipe it away and, was letting out this low, guttural, unbelievable Yahoo sound as a chant of victory of some sort. But needless to say, it was amazing and a little frightening, because it was, I couldn't see 2 inches in front of outside of my tent, because, up there, as anyone knows, when you're in the woods like that, it's, once the sun goes down, you can't see much. So, if I had to guess, I'd say that creature was he had to be at least 50 or no more than 50 to 100 yards away. And that was the first instance. The second instance is the one that I submitted to you, which, again, this was an area right off the Appalachian Trail in North Georgia. This happened just 30 days later from that first instance. And what happened was there's a camping area, kind of an agreed upon camping area off this one section of the Appalachian Trail, and you can see that it's been used before. There's fire rings, and it's flat and it's ground level. It's a great place to pitch a tent for the night. And so I was there. There were a few others there, and as the sun was going down, out of nowhere, this huge tree comes crashing down, and immediately afterward, there is what I can only describe as a low guttural grunt. It sounded like a silverback gorilla. The tree comes crashing down. You hear the thump that hits the ground, and then you hear this like that. Mm-hmm. And I remember I didn't say anything because I was stunned. And then I think there were 4 other campers, and they all just looked at each other and said, "Holy smokes, that's got to be a Sasquatch." And but that's, as weird as that is, this is where the story gets even more weird. As I had submitted to you earlier, the next morning there's a U.S. Forest Service road that runs parallel to this section of the AT. And the next morning, I had ventured off trail to get some water to make coffee, and which I like to do when I'm backpacking. I get up real early, get a fire going, get some coffee going, take my time. And when I was near the U.S. Forest Service road, getting water, here comes an SUV and I noticed that it had a huge Sasquatch silhouette sticker. I mean, it was huge. It was like the size of a basketball on the back of this SUV. So I immediately looked at that and I said, well, here's a couple of guys I can share what just happened the night before with, and they'll be just as interested as me. And as I'm approaching the vehicle, on the driver's side, the guy rolls the window down a little bit, and he gives me this really kind of strange look. And at the same time, I'm looking into the SUV, and there's 2 guys in there, and Lon, they were completely tacked out to the max. These guys had AR-15s on the rack, tactical vests, pistols, knives. I mean, these guys were completely tacked out. They looked like the military, is what they looked like. And so I just to keep, as I'm noticing this, just to keep it kind of lighthearted, I said, "Hey guys," I said, I saw the sticker on the back of your SUV, and I said, I kind of have a smaller version of that sticker on my car, which I do. It was given to me by a family member, and I just stuck it on there for fun. Mm-hmm. And when I said that, they both looked at each other, then with this kind of strange look. Then they looked at me, and the guy in the passenger seat says, "Well, that was just a gag gift from my girlfriend." He stomps on the gas and takes off. Now, 95% of my mind says that it was coincidence that these 2 guys happened to show up, literally just 8 to 10 hours after there was an encounter with a creature who had pushed over a pretty big, healthy tree. But there's 5% of my mind that says that can't be coincidence, especially when you factor in how military style these 2 guys were. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they showed up in that very spot, now one of the more likely scenarios that I've been told by other people that I've shared this story with is that I don't get a cell signal when I'm up there in North Georgia, but sometimes other carriers, I guess maybe they have better strength, and some people do get signals. I can't help but think that maybe one of those other campers made a call, somebody overheard it, and that's how these guys were able to show up. I'm not quite sure.
Mm. Yeah, this is something that's starting to crop up more and more in the Appalachian Mountains, and then especially along the trail. There have been a lot of stories, and because people are on that trail, of course, if anybody's going to see anything, it's going to be along there. But these guys in military that are carrying weapons is being reported more and more. And unfortunately, in my opinion, I don't like the idea of people out there shooting guns and trying to kill these things.
Yeah, I don't either.
Yeah.
No, either do I.
So,
but
Rick,
let me,
go ahead.
oh, okay, I'm sorry about that. I wanted to add real quick, Lon. One of the more, I guess, popular, more iconic parts of the Appalachian Trail in Georgia. There's 80 miles of Appalachian Trail. One of the more popular, iconic spots of those 80 miles is a section of the Appalachian Trail called Blood Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to throw this in real quick. There was a roadside sighting just 2 nights ago at that very spot.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, Regan, what's been going on in your neck of the woods? What kind of things have you collected and seen, and some of the stories that you've been hearing?
Right. Well, even though I've never seen a Sasquatch, I have no doubt they exist. You know, and 2 Oregon cases that are very on the stranger side of all this. One happened back in the 60s, not too far from here, maybe about 50 miles from here. And there were reports of a flying saucer crashing into a lake. And then right after that, there were reports of a white Bigfoot-like creature in the area that would run alongside of cars and trucks. Some investigators went out there, a journalist. She went out there with a friend who was a psychic who said she communicated with this creature. The creature said his name was Flix, and he came from outer space. And so there were a lot of things, a lot of stories like that from the sheriffs and other witnesses who would go down there looking for the creature, who would hear sounds, growls, and they would smell that typical kind of sulfur smell and hear like thudding footsteps, but they would never see anything. They'd have the same reactions of animals, horses and dogs. Supposedly this creature killed a dog, some hunting dogs that were sent out there. And so that was a big story going around at the time. And then another one, I think back in the 70s, maybe a little later, a man by the name of Stan Johnson had a ranch. And one day he was out there. Now, he said he had had UFO experiences and Bigfoot encounters when he was much younger. And I think, and I might have this wrong, he used to live back east, I think in Tennessee. But then in Oregon, he encountered a Sasquatch family on his property. And once again, they communicated telepathically. They brought him aboard their ship. All of these strange stories. He self-published a couple of books he wrote about these experiences. And so I had occasion to meet him once. He was speaking at a UFO conference here in Eugene, Oregon. And at the time, he was still quite out. He must have been in his 80s. And yet he was very vibrant, very, very strong. He went to shake my hand, and I thought he was going to break my arm. He was that strong. He was like, whoa. The energy coming off this guy was something else. So I just was interested in these stories, and I collected his stories and all the material I could on him. And several years ago now, I was talking to a New Age bookstore, the owner here in town, about this guy, Stan Johnson, and his Bigfoot experiences. And we're standing there in her shop, and all of a sudden I feel, but I also see, and believe me, I know this sounds insane, a cone of white light coming down from the ceiling and just going whoops right over me. And I could see through it, like kind of like frosted glass. I could see everything, but I was like inside this thing, and sound was a little muffled, and I was seeing strange kind of lights going off and on, and then when we finished our conversation, this cone went right back up into the ceiling, and I must have had a really weird look on my face because she's looking at me, sort of smiling. I said, so I told her what happened. I said, you're not going to believe this. I know how it sounds, but the whole time we were talking about Stan Johnson and his Bigfoot experiences, and she just smiled and said, oh, that stuff happens all the time when we talk about him.
Mm.
So all I have to say is that's what happened. I was at a Bigfoot conference a couple of years after that, and I was telling a woman there that, and she said it was the spirit was speaking to me, and I'm not saying anything about that either way. I'm just reporting what happened,
Right.
the data, yeah. And so I did think that was a very strange experience.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Yeah, right. And I've had a lot of things that happened to me, again, in connection with UFOs and other things, come to me psychically and through the dream state and when I'm meditating in trance-like states and on the astral. And I had, so I was kind of doing that in a little meditation thing. And this image, all of a sudden I was kind of flying along the coastline, the Oregon coast, and I almost hit a Sasquatch walking amongst the rocks. He had come down from the woods, and he looked at me, and he was really upset that I was like interfering with his space.
Mm.
He was not happy that I was there, and so I just freaked myself out. I said, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm leaving. Like I'm going to snap out of it. And some other strange, just events like that. I could go on and on and on. Dan said something though about. I made a note of it, now I can't find it. About coincidences. I don't think there are any coincidences. I think that was what you experienced now was a real synchronicity. I mean, something was really going on there more than just, a coincidence. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's how it struck me. I think at things like this, we need to pay attention to all these weird synchronicities.
I tend to shade more towards the practical side when it comes to a lot of these things. But this is the one part of my mind that says no, it just can't be coincidence. That part I just can't let go. Out of the 80 miles of Appalachian Trail in Georgia, you mean to tell me that these guys just happened to show up at the one spot where a creature had pushed down a tree just 8 to 10 hours earlier? There's just no way that's a coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this metaphysical or part paranormal aspect to the Bigfoot phenomenon is becoming more apparent more and more nowadays. It was a time where if you were a Bigfoot enthusiast and you were investigating Bigfoot, this other aspect to the phenomena would not come into play. But I think it's becoming more and more prevalent now. I think people are actually being more open to the possibility that these beings they may be also actual flesh and blood, but it's not exactly, indigenous, that they're coming in from somewhere else. I don't, there's just too many incidents where these things suddenly disappear where they do things that is just impossible to understand in the natural world. I mean, one phenomenon that we have been noticing more so the past 3 to 4 years, especially here in Pennsylvania, is the orb activity around sightings of Bigfoot. Now, I know you've written about orbs for many years, Regan, but this is something that seems to be showing up with this phenomena. I'm going to ask Dan, have you ever seen any orbs in any of your investigations?
I have not. I know I've heard of others, having that type of experience, but I have not.
Oh, okay. And you, Regan, I'm quite sure you have heard of it.
Yes, I have. And in fact, one of the first stories I came across, I forgot where now, when I first started looking into this, was of orbs being seen in connection with a Bigfoot encounter. And, there's all kinds of orbs. There's spirit orbs, and there's light that I think is different than what somebody would say is like a ghost or spirit.
Right.
And then there's just craft, and then there's all, when we talk about orbs, I think sometimes we just need to make distinctions so we know what we're talking about.
Right.
But, and I myself saw a huge orb, but that was a UFO, and there was no Bigfoot connection, or at least as far as I know.
As far as you know, this is one thing that I have been investigating for a long time, and in fact, Stan Gordon has talked about this for many, many years. Mm-hmm. That the UFO activity and Bigfoot activity seem to be connected in some circumstances, where there have been sightings of UFOs, and then not long after, or even at the same time, a Bigfoot is being seen. I think it's more prevalent in areas that have high activity, like in the Chestnut Ridge in Pennsylvania and West Virginia, out in, and you talk about northern Georgia. I mean, I have heard so many crazy stories in that area for years of these UFO and other phenomena being associated with UFOs. I think the veil has thinned to where you can kind of make a strong argument for there being a connection to a lot of these phenomena.
Yeah,
go ahead, Dan.
North Georgia is definitely, I completely agree with your assessment. And even North Georgia has even had some dogman sightings as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think cryptid activity and UFO and even spirit energy kind of goes hand in hand in a lot of these areas. And we've been hearing for years around here of that happening, and there are a lot of areas in the United States, particularly in Canada, where all these phenomena seem to congregate or show up once in a while. So I think I think like I said, I think there's a strong argument for these phenomena being connected.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And here on the West Coast, there are a lot of Bigfoot researchers who go out there and do active, physical field investigations. And I don't know, you mentioned Stan Gordon, and there's Tom Powell, who's written some interesting books about his experiences that include the more, I don't know if you want to call it paranormal or what, but beyond flesh and blood, something else is going on. Strange synchronicities, telepathy, just that clearly is saying there's more here than, I don't know if in every case those stranger elements are present or a part of it, but certainly a big part of it. And I agree with you, Lon, too, that I think researchers are starting to be more open to that part of it. Because if we pretend it's not there, we're not going to get anywhere.
Well, I know years ago when I was doing this, and if I even mentioned something about an interdimensional or paranormal aspect to the Bigfoot, I mean, you get laughed at. People think you're crazy, and it's just not. It's just not like that anymore.
They pick you up and carry you out.
Yeah, that's true.
No.
Yeah, I mean, it has gotten to the point now where, well, I mean, a body's never been found. There's fleeting evidence, physical evidence, footprints, scat, hair, whatever, of these beings, but a body has never been found. So, as you start thinking about this, and I do realize it's difficult to even find much of any wildlife bodies in the woods because nature takes care of a lot of that very quickly. But it does still seem very hard to believe that any body or any aspect, skeleton or whatever, has ever been found of a Bigfoot. You got to have that in the back of your mind that maybe there's something else to explain why people aren't seeing these things dead. What do you think about that, Dan?
I mean, it's definitely something to consider. If you had asked me 5-10 years ago what this creature is, I would have said, look, it's an undiscovered primate, 100% flesh and blood. But let me tell you something. As time has gone on, in the deeper I've gotten into this phenomenon, I would say my opinion has changed, and I still believe in the flesh and blood, but only by about 60 to 70%. The remaining 30% has now, of my opinion, has now been open to these type of possibilities. Ron Moorhead, who has some of the best audio, I think, and just like the Patterson-Gimlin film is considered the best evidence over the course of 50 years, I think the best audio evidence ever collected was by Ron Moorhead in the 70s. And of course I'm referring to the Sierra Sounds. And he came out with a book last year called Quantum Bigfoot. And I haven't read the whole book, but I've read excerpts. And he lays out how quantum theory can be used as an explanation for what some of these creatures can do, like cloaking and seeing a set of footprints that just out of nowhere disappear. So that's one. Then you've got another camp that says, well, they're the part of the Nephilim. So there are so many different camps that I've kind of become a little more open to, because the longer you're in, I'm sure you guys can probably back me up on this, the longer you're in it, the more strange it gets. And one simple solution, in this case, flesh and blood, just doesn't really explain enough.
Well,
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are areas, particularly in the United States and Canada, where there very well may be indigenous pods of these beings. Now, Pacific Northwest, Florida. I mean, areas where a specific type of Bigfoot has been seen over the years. But the fact that here in like the eastern part of the United States, northeast part of the United States, the upper Midwest, there seem to be a different varieties. And I mean, I'm talking different body shapes, different aspects, different characteristics, to where it's kind of hard to believe that in these indigenous groups would be living and not seen somehow. That there's some way, like you mentioned, cloaking. Well, maybe that is part of what's going on. Maybe it's the cloaking. Maybe it's some type of parallel reality, something where they come in and out somehow. But in some areas, to me, it just seems difficult to believe that there are family groups and that they haven't been seen more often. What do you think about that, Regan?
Yeah, I agree that there does seem to be different types, varieties. And like I said before, I don't know if some of them have these abilities, or they just choose not to use them, or use them in certain situations. I don't have any answers, except that obviously there's a lot going on, and the types of activity and the types of creatures seen do seem to have some variety on, regionally. And you mentioned Ron Moorhead too. Yes, that's a book I'm aware of. I'm looking forward to reading it. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I've heard him interviewed and read interviews with him, and his experiences and his take on it are very interesting, and he's open and willing to talk about them and put it out there. As to, again, what is it? I don't know, but it is.
Well, Dan, what else have you seen in your investigations that seem to indicate that the Bigfoot are in the area?
Okay, so this occurrence happened just this past September. This is going to take me probably just a couple minutes because I have to provide the background information, but just bear with me. So here in the state of Georgia, we have a truly excellent place. It's called Expedition Bigfoot. It's a museum dedicated to Bigfoot. It is a fantastic place, and there was a big event there a couple years ago. Bob Gimlin was visiting, and I went to this event. I wanted to meet the man, meet the legend, and there were a lot of people there, as you can imagine. And so, of course, I started meeting different people, talking with other people, and I met a young man. I don't want to submit any names, and I don't want to submit any locations, so you'll have to forgive me for that. But I met a young man, and he's a bright guy, and we kept in touch through Facebook for the last couple years, talking about Bigfoot, different Bigfoot topic-related subjects. And he actually had a couple of sightings in different parts of North Georgia, which he described to me. I didn't hear from him for a little while, probably about 6 months. And then out of nowhere, back this past summer, I get a couple messages from him. And he's telling me that he's discovered an area in North Georgia, not as north as the Appalachian Trail, which is significant. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. Mm-hmm. But he found an area where not only did he have a sighting, but basically you don't have to hike very far before you start getting activity. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't believe him. But, I love the outdoors. I'm a backpacker. So I'm like, you know what? If I can get a partner with me to go hiking one night, why not? I'll go. So we met up, and this is a month later, which now would be September of just this past year, 2018. And we're actually driving on a gravel road to the parking lot where the trailhead is. He stops the car and says, "Look to your left." And I see this humongous tree structure in the form of a letter X. Now, let me be the first to say, Lon, that I've always been kind of skeptical about tree formations. But when you see one up close in real time in the woods with no connective root system, in other words, where these trees broke and where they were placed were very far apart, and the way they were situated, about 10 to 12 feet high, it's not hard to figure it out when you're looking at it that these were placed there, and it's just not deadfall. Now, so here I am in the woods off the parking lot looking at this tree structure in complete amazement. And what happens next? A clear, loud whoop.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just like the kind that you hear on shows or recordings. I mean, it was whoop, clear as day. So he's looking at me and I'm looking at him. He's like, "You heard that?" I said, "I did." And he's like, "They're close by." So we continued onward. We got to the parking lot, hiked in a little bit, and it was during the week when most people are working or in school. So there was nobody. We were the only people on that trail because there were no other cars, there were no other hikers, nobody was around. About 45 minutes in, after the whoop, we hear this, how can I describe it, Lon? It was a yell.
Mm-hmm.
It was a yell and a scream, like a like an insane mad woman, because it was high pitched.
Mm-hmm.
And that also is a very common sound heard among many other eyewitnesses that I've talked to in my own investigations over the years. So once again, he looks at me, I look at him, and we're like, maybe we should start heading back to the car. Maybe we've overstayed our welcome because there's obviously not someone but something here besides us.
Mm-hmm.
About 10 minutes after that, because we did decide to head back, what happens next? Just the good old-fashioned rocks start being pelted our way.
Yeah.
And I said, "That's it. I've had enough. I want to leave, and I want to get out of here." And the guy that was with me said, "Okay." So needless to say, we double timed it back to the car, and we got out of there. And I was really frightened because, to leave the trailhead, you had to drive on that gravel road first, and to get to the road. And I'm thinking, if these things are that close, well, something's probably going to run at our car or in front of our car, and that's going to make the whole situation even a little more frightening for me. But thankfully that didn't happen. But nonetheless, we got out of there. Now here's the mind bender, Lon. That area that I'm referring to, and again, I apologize. I don't want to name any locations because I don't want people flocking to it or.
Oh, I understand.
This location where this occurred, and there have been other sightings there too, is literally, Lon, only 1 hour's walking distance from what would be considered a downtown type of setting.
Mm-hmm.
Strip malls, intersections, 4-lane roads. It's only an hour's walking distance, and that was really an eye opener.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. That was the occurrence.
You do hear a lot more of the what people sometimes call the urban Bigfoot, where you see them in these more populated areas. I had a woman down near San Antonio, Texas, contact me not long ago. Lived in a subdivision, and this one Bigfoot was just scaring the hell out of everybody in this subdivision. Would walk up to people while they be in the garden doing something, or out in the front part of the house. Just walk up, and I was getting people telling me that, and I kept saying, "Well, can you get a photograph?" And it's one thing. Well, by the time I got the phone and everything, it was gone. Well,
yeah,
I did send an investigator to it, and they told me, I believe what they're telling. I've seen tracks, and these people are genuinely frightened. So the fact that these these reports coming from residential areas is not surprising to me.
So
Well,
I wanted
sorry.
to. Oh, I'm sorry, Reagan. I'll make
No,
this
you go
real quick.
ahead. I just had to, piggyback on what you were saying. You and Lon were saying about urban areas, but you go ahead.
I just want to add on real quick. A few weeks later, Lon, I decided to go back to that area by myself. And I really wish I hadn't, because first of all, I am a missing 411 follower. And so I broke the cardinal rule of going by myself like that. But I was so amazed at what had happened that I went back by myself a few weeks later. Same thing. I saw the tree structure again. I hiked in only about a mile, and I heard the most prolific series of wood knocks that I've ever heard in my life. And this wasn't deadfall. Anyone who's been in the woods, even if it's for a short amount of time, knows the difference of what deadfall sounds like and what wood on wood being pounded against each other purposely sounds like. This was like two Louisville sluggers going at it. And I immediately turned around and got out of there. And then as I was leaving, just before I got back to the trailhead, I saw a tree, and I wanted to get out of there so bad. I stopped just for a quick moment. I was going to take a picture, but I was kind of frightened, so I just kept on going. But there was a tree right there on the side of the trail that had been just freshly twisted and bent. Now, it was a clear day, sunny blue skies. And that same tree had not been like that just 20 minutes prior when I had entered that trailhead. So that and it was the same area.
So Reagan, what were you about to say about the?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's just one of those things. Not far outside of Eugene at all. I mean, less than 10 miles, but still a very rural area. Eugene's kind of urban. It's a small city. It's, there's a university here and the whole thing. But you just drive a few minutes in any direction, and it's, woods and rural. And so anyway, I decided, and I'm a 411, nerd as well, and so I probably shouldn't have been doing this, but I just decided I'm going to take a drive into wherever. And I'm driving. It's a beautiful day, beautiful afternoon, and I'm up, further and further out, still on a paved road, and there are houses here and there, but, the further you go. And then I get to the top of a hill, beautiful, stunning view. So I just pull over, get out of the car. I'm looking out over the valley, but right across the road behind me, just nothing but hills and woods, just thick woods. And I feel great. It's a beautiful day. I'm just standing there, and all of a sudden, I felt, I almost heard it like this roaring cloud of energy coming from behind me, from the woods. I mean, this was an intelligent, sentient presence that was shouting at me to get out. They did not want me there. Get out now if you know what's good for you, kind of thing. And a couple of people said to me, well, maybe it was a panic attack. Well, I've had panic attacks. And believe me, this was nothing going on with me at all. This was from outside coming at me. And I took about 2 seconds to wonder what is going, and the thing just kept coming, and I said, fine, I'm leaving. I hear you. And I just hopped in the car, and I took off. And I don't know what that was. I've never experienced anything like that before, ever. and there have been reports of a Bigfoot very close by. So I don't doubt that at all. I know people that, within 5 minutes you're at their house and they say they've seen Bigfoot on their property, So I think they're a lot closer than some people might think.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's true.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. As a matter of fact, one of my future projects is to put together a sightings database where sightings are occurring within only 3 to 5 miles of, say, everyday civilization. Stores, intersections, busy roads.
Right. Yeah. This thing. My point was this thing. I don't know why. There's a little bit of me that associates it with Sasquatch, and I don't know why. I mean, I didn't hear anything, there wasn't any rock throwing or any of the typical behaviors, and I certainly didn't see anything. But there's this like weird subconscious nagging, nudging thing that tells me that. And I'm not saying that it is or that was. It's just, again, it's what happened, and I'm just relating the experience.
Well, Dan and Regan, I want to thank you both for joining me on this show. I think I'm going to do more of this, have these theme shows like this, and just bring regular enthusiasts of whatever cryptid we're talking about to come on and present their evidence and their cases. Maybe this is something that we'll keep going. Again, thank you both for coming on the show.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lon.
Okay. Now, I want to talk about a 3-day event that's coming up on May 31st to June the 2nd of this year. It's titled the Bigfoot Camping Adventure, and it's going to be out in Fayette County, Pennsylvania. You can find the website at pabigfootcampingadventure.com. And I tell you, this is going to be the event of the year for Bigfoot enthusiasts. We've got some. Eric Altman is the person running the show on this, and he had two other events 1 3 years ago, 1 2 years ago, and we skipped last year, but it's coming back this year, and I'm going to tell you, you don't want to miss it. Some of the guests: Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, Cliff Barrickman, the Ames team, Ken Gerhardt, Bill Brock. Then there's Stan Gordon, David Weatherly, Seth Breedlove, Ron Murphy, Jay Pacocha and his son, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, Rick Fisher, as well the Phantoms and Monsters 14 research team. Butch Witkowski, Sean Forker, and myself will be there. There are going to be a lot of different guest speakers. It's going to be a fun-filled weekend. So I'm going to tell you, again, the website is pabigfootcampingadventure.com. Get your tickets. Make your plans. The hotel rooms are going quick, so if you plan on being there, I suggest you get on the ball as quick as possible, because this is going to be the event of the year. Now, listeners can show their support for Arcane Radio by becoming a patron. Simply go to phantomsandmonsters.com and click the Podbean patron banner. Arcane Radio also accepts direct donations. Now, if you have an unexplained encounter or sighting, feel free to contact me through the Phantoms and Monsters blog site. I want to again thank Dan Maslak and Regan Lee for joining me this evening, and I want to thank you for listening to the show. Good night, and have a great weekend.